it is a very dangerous development. The HRVP already made his opinion known about this when he tweeted that the ongoing escalation around Idlib is a very dangerous escalation and needs to stop urgently. There is a risk of sliding into a very dangerous and major open international military confrontation. So we are urging all parties to de-escalate, to stop the ongoing hostilities and ongoing confrontations, not only because it's causing a lot of destruction, but it's causing unspeakable human suffering of the civilians, mainly the civilian population in Idlib, which then turns into refugees and is pushed further either to Turkey or then from Turkey away. When it comes to information or speculation about migrant movements in Turkey, I would like to stress that there was no official announcement from the Turkish side about any changes in their asylum seeker, refugee or migrant policy. So from our point of view, the EU-Turkey statement, which was conceived in order to manage the irregular migration, this statement still stands, and we expect Turkey to uphold its commitments stemming from this statement. And the Turkish authorities officially confirmed that there is no change in the official policy, no change in official position, and we expect that it will stay so and that Turkey will continue to deliver on the commitments stemming from the EU-Turkey statement. On the migration flows, and I will take the liberty to answer also this question, although it's more for Adalbert, but as you can see, we coordinate very closely. We are aware of a number of reports that are circulating in the public domain and in the social media about alleged movements of people, be it migrants, refugees, towards the EU borders. But first, what we need to see is the own assessment done in contacts with the member states and our appropriate agencies to be able to say whether there are any significant changes. And you can be assured that we are watching and following this very closely, and if there is a need, appropriate actions will be taken.
Thank you. Georgi?
Yeah, Peter, you are mentioning assurances from the Turkish side that nothing has changed. I would like to know, when did you get these assurances? Is it today? Because if it's yesterday, those assurances may not be valid. I also would like to know if something is being prepared on the diplomatic front. There has been a lot of talk about a possible summit. The situation in Syria probably needs such a summit between the main players, including Russia. I wonder if the EU is involved. And the question, which is probably more for Adalbert, but anyway, I will ask it: what can the Commission do to help Bulgaria and Turkey cope with a wave of migrants trying to cross the border? What are the capacities of the European Commission to help those countries? Thank you.
Okay, indeed, the last one is more for Adalbert. On your first question, in terms of terminology, I didn't say assurances. We have seen no official announcement of any changes. This no announcement of any changes was underlined by the recent statement from today by the Turkish Foreign Ministry, which said that there are no changes to the Turkish policy on asylum seekers, refugees or migrants. So, in other words, we have not been notified by our Turkish partners that they are changing their policy, which they applied so far when it comes to migrant issues or refugee issues. That's the first thing. The second thing, the summit on Syria you were mentioning, you were probably referring to talk between Turkey, Russia and possibly Germany, France about the meeting on Syria. On this, you have seen the follow-up that it's not materializing most likely. But for the EU, Syria is a constant source of worry and impetus to try to find the ways The latest example being the conclusions or being the statement of the leaders of the member states during the European Council, where they called on all the involved in Idlib specifically to cease the hostilities and to allow the humanitarian access, because this is a dire humanitarian situation. An enormous number of people is suffering in tremendous conditions, and no responsible member of international community can stand idle and watch this, not to speak about increasing the suffering of the people. That's why the EU is very consistent in very urgent calls for the parties involved to stop the confrontations, because the confrontations are fueling the unspeakable humanitarian suffering of the civilian population. When it comes to other activities, HRVP has been since last night in intense contacts with his counterparts, international partners. The contacts are ongoing, not only at his level, but also at other levels on the side of the EAS. So we are making very intense outreach to our international and EU partners to see what would be the best way for the EU to handle the situation and to contribute to the de-escalation. That's one track, the political track. And on the humanitarian track, you know that the EU is the biggest donor for the Syrian people, for the Syrian refugees, and we continue our engagement to help to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people, both inside Syria, in cooperation with our partners, and also outside Syria in the neighboring countries.
Thank you very much. Indeed, outreach activities at all levels. Petra informed you about the outreach carried out by the High Representative Vice President. The President, Ursula von der Leyen herself, is engaging in outreach at her level, and we are working within the Commission on looking at possibilities for humanitarian aid support in case of a worsening of the situation. Unless there are any questions for Peter, I will ask Adalbert to come to complete on migration. But Georgi, you have a follow-up. Yes.
Just if you can say more concretely, I mean, Russia is a very important player in that case. What kind of contacts do you have with Moscow?
As I said, various contacts on several levels. That levels include also ambassadors, and they include also HRVP and his contacts with Foreign Minister Lavrov, which happened in the past and is scheduled to take place also today.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
Just in relation, because there are so many reports that there are refugees trying to come to Europe, you know, I suppose in spite of what we've heard from the Turkish Foreign Ministry, what will be the response from the EU if it is found that Erdogan has breached his commitment to the EU-Turkey deal?
Again, on this, let's not preempt and let's not make premature conclusions. As I said, we expect Turkey to deliver on its part of the deal. We have heard the statements from the Turkish official places that there is no change in the Turkish policy in this respect so far. But at the same time, we are making the necessary assessment of the situation and receiving and discussing information with our member states and with the responsible appropriate agencies who are in charge of exactly following and assessing these issues, and then the necessary response will be made. But let's not jump ahead of the events. First, we need to see the assessment and to have the confirmation or denial or the analysis of what is the development in terms of number of people being on the move towards the borders with the EU and actually trying to cross the borders.
Thank you very much. Further questions for Peter? Yes, Maria.
Thank you. Maria Audrescu, La Libre Belgique. I'm just wondering, have you prepared for this scenario? I mean, it's not the first time that Turkey kind of threatens to open the doors towards the European Union. Is there any action plan that has been prepared and that you can activate in case this happens? I mean, this was kind of a predictable situation in a way, unfortunately. Thank you.
So I think that Peter responded amply on the political context and what we understand and assess as being the situation in relation to the Turkish authorities' position vis-à-vis the EU-Turkish agreement. Now you're asking about operational preparations, which wouldn't be for Peter to answer. I will invite in a second Adalbert to take this question as well as previous ones in relation to migration. I just want to check if there are additional questions for Peter, which there are, so we are going to come back to you very, very rapidly. Yes, you were next.
Hi, Dana. Ella Joyner from the German press agency. It's actually a question for you on something you just said now, that the Commission is looking at further humanitarian aid to help the situation. Would that be within the context of the EU-Turkey understanding, or through what channel could this aid be channeled?
Thank you very much. So, as I said, we are looking at the situation. Adalbert will provide you the details in relation to what we would believe as being the necessary contingency plans in relation to migration. So we do not have anything specific to announce at this stage on that. We started looking at making our own assessments of contingency planning in relation also to possible necessary humanitarian assistance to the people affected by the recent developments in Syria and close to the border with Turkey. But we have nothing specific to announce at this stage other than we are looking into this part of contingency planning. So other questions for Peter? Yes, Nicola, is it for Peter? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. Nicola Nielsen, E-Observer. I just wanted to get a clarification of what Borrell was saying yesterday when he was talking about that he was talking about the need for guns and arms and military capacity in Africa. And and he said that the EU would deliver on that front. So what kind of weapons is he talking about here? When will they be delivered? And what kind of guarantees are there in place to make sure they don't end up in the black market somehow? Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Nikolai. Actually, that would be for Virginie. So I give a last chance to Mose to ask a question to Peter, because he was keen on asking a question to Peter, and then I will call the other two spokespeople who owe you answers. So Mose, please go ahead.
I would like to ask Peter again if you could perhaps a bit elaborate on the options which you might have facing now the situation in North Syria, in Idlib, as you described, as very dangerous and unspeakable human suffering. Up to 1 million refugees are on the way, have fled, to the Turkish border, but they're not allowed to enter Turkey. I wonder, so what could be done? Now they're sleeping in the open. So does EU consider that one option is, let's say, to convince Turkey to open its borders for those refugees? Or should we focus on establishing a kind of safe zone in North Syria along the border to which humanitarian aid can be delivered, which it obviously cannot now? Understand?
Of course, thank you. It is very important, actually, yes, to have the humanitarian access, to be able to provide people with the necessary assistance, because this is what they need, be it on the Syrian territory or on the Turkish territory. Maybe going back to the question from the colleague from the DPA, just to recall that we have currently our people on the ground, colleagues from the ECHO are on the Turkish-Syrian borders, working together with the partners to provide the assistance to the Syrian refugees there. So we are working there. Our experts, they are monitoring the EU-funded humanitarian programs, and they are assessing the further needs. And we are, of course, depending on the development of the situation, ready to consider whether we can either increase or find other ways to provide for these people. As I mentioned, EU is the biggest donor for the Syrian people in need in this context. And we are also supporting other humanitarian organizations which have maybe better access and which are on the spot, on the ground to help the poor Syrian civilians who are suffering so much under the current circumstances. And to your question, Mose, about what are the alternatives or what are the options, there is only option. The fighting needs to stop. The indiscriminate attacks in Idlib on hospitals, on civilian targets, need to stop. That's a clear message, repeated with increased urgency from all the sides, from the EU member states, from different institutions, to the main actors of this confrontation. So Russia has to listen to this. Because the result is incredible humanitarian suffering. And as I mentioned, every responsible international actor has to take this into account and do whatever he or she can to stop this senseless humanitarian or human suffering. Yeah, so that's approximately.
Thank you very much. Another question for Peter, I understand. Yes, please go ahead.